History calls Adolf Hitler a monster. But what you're about to hear is far more disturbing. In this video, we reveal 5 shocking facts about Hitler that are rarely talked about. Facts that may explain how one man dragged the entire world into chaos. Watch till the end, because each fact gets darker. Fact 1. Adolf Hitler was rejected from art school. The failure that changed world history. Before Adolf Hitler became the most feared dictator in human history. Before World War II, before the Holocaust, and before the deaths of millions, he believed his destiny lay not in politics or war, but in art. A harmless dream that began quietly and ended catastrophically. Because in 1907, a young, poor, socially awkward Hitler arrived in Vienna with one burning ambition: to become a famous artist, convinced that painting would give his life meaning, respect, and purpose. And with this belief, he applied to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, fully expecting acceptance. But instead, the judges rejected him, criticizing his work for lacking creativity and emotional depth, particularly his inability to draw human figures. A rejection that shattered him internally, though outwardly he pretended it didn't matter. And what makes this moment terrifying is that it wasn't just a career setback. It was a psychological fracture, because Hitler didn't interpret the rejection as a challenge to improve. He saw it as humiliation inflicted by a world that refused to recognize his greatness. And driven by obsession, he applied again in 1908, believing fate owed him success, only to be rejected a second time, even more brutally, as the Academy refused to let him advance beyond the entrance stage. A moment that permanently destroyed his fragile sense of self-worth, pushing him into poverty, isolation, and homelessness, where he slept in shelters, struggled to survive by selling cheap postcards, and spent long nights alone, stewing in resentment, anger, and bitterness. And instead of reflecting on his limitations, Hitler began blaming society, elites, and imagined enemies for his failure. A mental shift that would later become the foundation of his extremist ideology. Because historians agree that during these Vienna years, Hitler was exposed to radical nationalism, racial hatred, and conspiracy theories, absorbing them eagerly as explanations for why his life had collapsed. And this transformation is crucial, because rejection didn't humble him. It radicalized him, turning personal failure into collective hatred. And here's the chilling part. Art professors later stated that Hitler wasn't but he lacked originality and emotional expression, meaning the rejection was fair, ordinary, and unremarkable. Yet its consequences were anything but, because when World War I broke out, Hitler found a new sense of purpose, replacing brushes with bullets and creativity with destruction, discovering that obedience, discipline, and violence gave him the validation art never did. And after Germany's defeat, the same bitterness from his rejected artist days, now amplified by national humiliation, fueling his rise as a political agitator who weaponized anger, identity, and blame. And many historians argue that if Hitler had been accepted into art school, even as a mediocre student, history itself might have changed course. Because the rejection didn't just alter his career path, it reshaped his worldview, convincing him that he was destined for greatness, and that anyone who stood in his way was an enemy. And the most haunting realization is this: the man who would later decide who deserved to live or die once desperately wanted nothing more than approval, recognition, and belonging. And when he was denied those things, he didn't fade into obscurity. He redirected his rage toward the world, proving that unresolved rejection, when mixed with ego, resentment, and ideology, can become one of the most destructive forces in human history. Fact 2. Adolf Hitler was addicted to powerful drugs, and they may have controlled Nazi Germany. Behind Hitler's speeches, an iron image of control, a terrifying secret lurked. He was heavily addicted to powerful drugs, and this may have influenced some of the most disastrous decisions of World War II. By the late 1930s, Hitler relied entirely on his personal doctor, Dr. Theodor Morel, who injected him daily with a cocktail of over 35 substances, including sedatives, painkillers, hormones, and methamphetamine-like drugs. Most famously, Pervitin, a stimulant that caused euphoria, aggression, paranoia, and impaired judgment. Hitler's use was constant, sometimes multiple injections a day, making him one of the most heavily medicated leaders in history. As the war progressed, his dependency grew, intensifying mood swings, irrational optimism, explosive rage, and delusions of invincibility. Decisions like refusing retreat at Stalingrad, which cost hundreds of thousands of lives, happened under heavy drug influence. By 1944, his physical and mental decline was undeniable. Trembling hands, collapsed posture, slurred speech, and erratic behavior. Yet Hitler trusted moral completely, dismissing warnings from other doctors, while the drugs reinforced his godlike delusions, blurring reality and feeding the deadly path of Nazi Germany. Historians still debate how much of the Third Reich's destruction was caused not just by ideology, but by a chemically altered mind at the very top. Fact 3. Adolf Hitler survived over 40 assassination attempts, and each escape made him more dangerous. Adolf Hitler should have died long before the end of World War II, and the fact that he didn't may be one of history's most terrifying twists, because between the 1920s and 1945 there were more than 40 documented assassination attempts on his life, carried out by political rivals, resistance fighters, foreign intelligence agencies, and even members of his own inner circle. And what makes this fact chilling is not just how often death came close, but how every narrow escape deepened Hitler's belief that he was protected by destiny, untouchable, chosen for a greater mission, a delusion that made him increasingly reckless, paranoid, and brutal. Because the earliest attempts began when Hitler was still a rising extremist speaker, narrowly avoiding gunfire and violent attacks during chaotic political rallies. But as his power grew, so did the sophistication of the plots, including bombs hidden in meeting halls, time-delayed explosives planted near podiums, poison schemes, snipers positioned along parade routes, and elaborate plans designed to end the war by eliminating its central figure. And the most famous of these occurred on July 20th, 1944, when Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb inside a briefcase during a military meeting at Hitler's headquarters, a moment historians agree came terrifyingly close to changing world history forever, because the bomb exploded, killing 4 people and ripping apart the room. Yet Hitler survived with relatively minor injuries, saved by a heavy table leg that deflected the blast. And instead of interpreting this as a warning, Hitler saw it as proof of divine protection, openly claiming that fate had spared him for a reason. A belief that immediately turned deadly, because after the failed assassination he unleashed savage revenge, ordering mass arrests and executions, with thousands imprisoned or killed, including people only loosely connected to the plot, some of whom are executed slowly while being filmed for Hitler's personal viewing, revealing how survival intensified his cruelty rather than weakening it. And what makes this even more disturbing is that many assassination attempts failed not because of superior Nazi intelligence, but because of pure chance. Faulty detonators, last-minute schedule changes, miscalculations, or Hitler leaving rooms minutes early, meaning history repeatedly balanced on random seconds and inches, and each escape pushed Hitler further into paranoia, causing him to trust fewer people, tighten security, purge allies, and rely only on those who reinforced his delusions. And historians argue that had even one of these attempts succeeded, millions of lives might have been saved, because Hitler's survival prolonged the war, delayed Germany's surrender, and extended the suffering across Europe. And the most haunting realization is that Hitler's belief in destiny didn't protect him. It imprisoned an entire nation, because a man who believes he cannot be killed has no reason to compromise, retreat, or stop. And in the end, despite surviving dozens of assassination attempts, Hitler could not escape collapse, proving that fate did not make him immortal. It merely delayed the destruction while the world paid the price. Fact 4. Adolf Hitler turned an ancient symbol of peace into one of the most hated symbols in human history long before Adolf Hitler, long before Nazi Germany, and long before World War II. The swastika existed as a symbol of peace, balance, and good fortune, used for thousands of years across Asia, Europe, and even parts of the ancient Americas. Appearing in Hindu temples, Buddhist art, Greek pottery, and Nordic carvings. A simple geometric shape representing life, the sun, and harmony. But when Hitler rose to power, He deliberately hijacked this ancient symbol and transformed it into a global icon of fear, genocide, and hatred, permanently destroying its meaning for much of the world. Because, in the early 1920s, as Hitler was shaping the identity of the Nazi Party, he became obsessed with propaganda and visual psychology, believing symbols could influence people more deeply than speeches. And after studying various emblems, he chose the swastika, not for its spiritual roots, but because he believed it could be twisted into a representation of what he falsely called Aryan supremacy, manipulating history and mythology to justify racist ideology. And in his own writings, Hitler admitted that the Nazi flag was designed to provoke emotion, with red symbolizing movement, white nationalism, and the black swastika representing racial struggle, meaning the symbol was engineered as psychological warfare, not decoration. And once the Nazis seized power, the swastika flooded every corner of German life, stamped onto flags, uniforms, buildings, schools, coins, and official documents, becoming inseparable from authority and obedience. And as Nazi policies turned toward mass persecution and genocide, the symbol followed, appearing on ghettos, deportation orders, concentration camps, and execution sites, forever binding it to unimaginable human suffering. And here lies the most tragic consequence. Because when the war ended and the full horror of the Holocaust was revealed, the swastika's ancient meaning was erased from Western consciousness, transforming a symbol once associated with peace into one banned, censored, and feared, causing innocent cultures, particularly in Asia, to face confusion, backlash, and misunderstanding for using a sign that predated Hitler by thousands of years. And even today, decades after Hitler's death, the swastika remains illegal or restricted in several countries, not because of its original meaning, but because of what one man turned it into. And historians argue that this act of symbolic theft was one of Hitler's most effective tools, because symbols bypass logic and speak directly to emotion, allowing hatred to spread silently and rapidly. And the chilling lesson here is that Hitler didn't just destroy lives, he poisoned meaning itself, proving that evil does not only kill people, it corrupts culture, history, and identity. And the most haunting realization is this: a simple shape, once carved into temples to bring peace, can now ignite fear across the world, all because a dictator understood how to weaponize a symbol. Fact 5. Adolf Hitler's death is still one of the most controversial endings in modern history. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin and Nazi Germany collapsed into ruins, Adolf Hitler vanished from the world in a moment that was meant to be final, yet instead became one of the most debated deaths in modern history. Because, according to the official version, Hitler committed suicide inside his underground bunker by biting a cyanide capsule and shooting himself, while Eva Braun did the same, after which their bodies were carried outside, doused in gasoline, and burned to prevent capture. But what followed was confusion, secrecy, and contradictory evidence that opened the door to decades of doubt, rumors, and obsession. Because when the Soviets captured Berlin, they recovered remains believed to be Hitler's. Yet instead of presenting clear proof to the world, they classified the evidence, moved the remains multiple times, and released inconsistent statements, allowing uncertainty to grow. And this secrecy became even more suspicious when Soviet officials gave conflicting accounts about how Hitler died, with some claiming he was poisoned, others insisting he escaped, and still others saying the body was too damaged to identify. And the mystery deepened years later, when a skull fragment preserved by the Soviets was tested and reportedly found to belong to a woman, not Hitler, instantly reigniting global speculation. And while most historians agree Hitler did die in the bunker, the lack of transparent evidence created a vacuum filled by conspiracy theories, including claims that he escaped to South America, lived in Argentina under a false identity, or fled using secret Nazi escape routes. Theories so widespread that intelligence agencies like the FBI actually investigated reported sightings in the years after the war, not because they believed them, but because the uncertainty was real enough to justify concern. And what makes this fact truly chilling is that Hitler himself ordered his body destroyed, fully aware that denying the world's physical proof would prevent closure, turning his death into a psychological weapon. Because the dictator who dies without certainty can become a myth, And myths are far harder to erase than facts, allowing extremist ideologies to survive by clinging to the idea that their leader was never truly defeated. And inside the bunker during his final days, witnesses described Hitler as a broken, paranoid man, trembling, detached from reality, still issuing imaginary orders to armies that no longer existed, a haunting contrast to the powerful image he once projected. Yet even in that collapse, he controlled the narrative, ensuring that fear, doubt, and fascination would outlive him. And historians argue that this deliberate ambiguity was his final act of manipulation, because by refusing to leave a clear ending, Hitler denied the world closure and allowed his shadow to linger for generations. And the most disturbing realization is this: Hitler did not only haunt the world through his actions while alive, he haunted it through uncertainty after death, proving that unanswered questions can be just as powerful as truth itself.